People should understand that the building industry as an industry is a mess. All R&D is done on the backs of consumers. All of the engineering studies are these highly accelerated 7-week laboratory studies that sort of point the way but don't really show what the real effects of conditions are. Buildings have to hang around for 100 or more years. And a lot of these conditions that I'm talking about with moisture, they don't really start to show up until maybe 12, 15, and in some cases 20 years. I have a job going right now where new construction, beautiful house, $2 million, Lincoln Park, walk through the thing, you couldn't imagine a more beautiful house, but there were all these little like tiny water stains in locations that you might not notice if you weren't a home inspector. I think the repair tab finally topped out around $325,000. And it was to correct all of the things that the moderately famous architect had failed to address and that the builder had completely ignored. And these are all things that are part of the building code. They're well established in building science. There's plenty of periodicals and learning opportunities to learn about how to not have these things happen, but nobody does that. Wow. R&D is done on the backs of consumers. You know, this is a generalization, but it's not inaccurate. Once you get into like a very large, competently designed and engineered big development, you know, 50, 60, 100 units, you can still, well, there's a few buildings in Chicago, you can still have problems, but you don't find them as often as you do in the smaller developments. When you get into the 6 flats, that's all of the, you know, independent people out there that they paid their fee, they got their license, and they can build a house, or they can build 6 condos. And there are thousands of those guys out there. None of them have any education, don't know anything outside of what's already in their head. What's in their head is what they learned from their cousin, who learned it from his cousin, who learned it from his uncle. You know, I mean, it's this sort of bizarre, and we call it the circle of ignorance. There might be 15 or 20 of these guys, and they all work together, and they all believe the same thing, and because they all believe it, they all think that it's true. And it's pretty common for me to come onto those job sites with maybe a printout from the manufacturer or a building code or a building spec and say, see that thing you're installing over there? This is how you have to install it. This is the engineering that says this is how it has to go in. And I'll hand them the sheet, and they'll look at it, and they'll say, well, we don't do it that way. And I'll explain that, well, you have to do it that way or it won't work. And they're like, but we don't do it that way. And you get into the, I mean, and a lot of it is just ego driven. And I mean, it really is, it gets ridiculous. They dismiss anything that is not already within their head. So when you get into these small developments, you'd better be really, really careful, because I mean, I'm aware of hundreds of them that have significant major problems. You know, and these are the 3 flat to 6 flat, you know, and split face block is the poster child for that. You know, they're all 3 flat, 6 flat buildings. They were all built by independents. Most of those independents were LLCs that are now either defunct or gone, or who knows where they went. Right. And there are these 6 young homeowners that have no place to go, don't know what to do. Right. Another good question that we argue about on the internet. Right. There are those that say, we absolutely no, can't give you any prices. Well, that's just ridiculous. We're supposed to be experts in the field. And if you can't at least give somebody an order of magnitude idea about what something might cost, then it's just, we call them home inspector school inspectors. You know, I mean, they go out and they kind of feed back useless, pointless information. There's got to be some, and again, I'll qualify what I do. I won't write the numbers down, because what I write down has to hold up in court. And what holds up in court, at least when you're talking about numbers, any number has to be attached to a specification. And writing specifications is a whole nother job. But let's say if I look at a house and I see that, oh, the roof has failed, I should be able to tell the person that, look, okay, based on these variables, this roof is going to cost between $12,000 and $17,000. You know, so if the guy can't give you some sort of order of magnitude idea of what costs are, then they're not very good. Yeah, well, most of the important ones are unreasonable in my opinion, and I have them in my contract because my insurance company requires me to have them there. And it's one of those, okay. One of the things that gets argued about a lot is the liquidated damages amount. Most people have a contract that says my liability is limited to the amount of the inspection fee. Well, okay, California doesn't like that. I think that Illinois has actually upheld it in a couple cases and struck it down in other cases. Just on its face, that can't be right. You know, how can your liability in something that might run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars be limited to an inspection fee? I mean, it's ridiculous. Some of the disclaimers are reasonable. I can't tear down walls, floors, or ceilings. And if there is some latent defect hidden in the walls that nobody can see, it's not reasonable, at least in my opinion, it's not reasonable that I would be liable for it. Those sorts of things are relatively rare, because usually when you find major horrible defects in the walls, there's some other extenuating condition. You know, the roof leaks, the masonry was done wrong, the basement doesn't have a waterproofing solution. You know, there's some other thing that should be pointing you at issues. Then there's all kinds of disclaimers. I mean, I flatly disclaim all environmental stuff at this point. I actually tell my customers, look, I'm going to look around for this stuff, and if I see obvious forms of asbestos, I'll talk about it. If I see some mold or fungus, I'll talk about it. Lead paint is everywhere, you know, so it's sort of, I mean, so again, that's kind of where I'm in the middle. You know, environmental stuff gets really tricky because all the legal ramifications. And let's say asbestos. Most people don't realize asbestos was used in over 2,000 building products for over 100 years. So if I walk into a house built, you know, pre-1960, is there asbestos somewhere? Absolutely, somewhere. So what does it really mean? Who knows? You know, so the environmentals get a little dicey. So, and then there's a bunch of other. I mean, some guys. I try to keep my contract mashed down. It fits on an 8.5 by 11. It's pretty basic. An attorney wrote part of it. I actually wrote part of it to make it clear. You know, and it's a pretty basic, yeah.